Welcome to Twist of Fate, how an Afro-Caribbean man ended up in a Nazi concentration camp. We're so grateful to Mary Romney-Schaab for being willing to tell her father's story. And I'm going to introduce Mary in a few minutes. First, I want to tell you how really happy I am that you're all here. I'm Donna Berman, Executive Director of the Charter Oak Cultural Center. Charter Oak is a multicultural arts center doing the work of social justice through the arts. So I want to really invite you to sign up for our e-blasts. We're very proud of them. They are more than announcements of our events. There's all kinds of cool stuff in there. And please join us for the wonderful programming we offer. And please, if you enjoy our programs, consider giving a gift of any size. Really, truly, every dollar counts, and we are in need of support to keep doing what we're doing and to keep growing, because these are very difficult times for nonprofits. And here's what we do. We have a completely free School of the Arts. It's called City School of the Arts, and we provide 1,000 Hartford students, soon to be 1,250 because we're renovating our building, a completely free arts education. We also provide and present performances and arts events from which no one is ever turned away for lack of funds. And we have 3 programs for members of the homeless community that provide educational and employment opportunities. So we do a lot of work, and if you'd like to support it, we would love you to. Here's some upcoming events. Thursday, September 12th, Professor Chris Viles will be giving a talk called Project 2025, An Authoritarian Ambition. He's a professor at UConn, and he's a really wonderful lecturer. He's a specialist in fascism, American fascism, and we've had him speak many times before. Thursday, September 19th at 4 in the afternoon, organizational psychologist Yoav Peck, Executive Director of Solidarity of Nations, will give a talk called Holding Out Hope in Israel, Palestine. The reason the talk is going to be at 4 o'clock in the afternoon is because of the time difference. He's going to be doing the talk from Israel. Thursday, September 26th, Dr. Christiane de la Rosa will give a talk called Through a Different Lens, How Latinx Women Are Changing the Way Theology is Done. And that's part of our Ada Maria Isazi Diaz Justice Institute. And we do a lecture in the fall and in the spring, and this is our fall lecture. And she's just marvelous. She's at BU's Theological School. Also, every Wednesday, a group meets on Zoom at noon to discuss the 1619 Project. I think I speak for all of us. I know I speak for myself when I say it's really been a life-changing experience, and anyone can join and jump in at any time. No prior reading or knowledge is necessary. So we invite you to come and join us. We're taking 2 weeks off. We'll be resuming right after Labor Day, Wednesdays at noon. So, please join us. And please check out our website and sign up for our e-blast for more information. That brings me to our speaker for tonight. Mary Romney-Schaab was born in New York City, but her roots are in the Caribbean island nation of St. Martin. A retired educator, she spent over 40 years teaching English as a second language in Madrid, New York, Barcelona, and Connecticut. She has master's degrees in instructional media, in the teaching of English to speakers of other languages, and Spanish, and a bachelor's degree in Spanish. She is interested in languages, oral history, genocide studies, and African diaspora history, and has published in these areas. Mary is a beloved member of our 1619 group, and it's really an honor to have this opportunity to learn from her in this context too. So please welcome Mary Romney-Schaab. And I just want to mention one more thing, a little mundane thing. Please make sure your volume is up as high as it can be, and you probably want to make sure that you are on speaker view. So that's my introduction. And Mary, God bless you. It's so great to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that introduction. So good evening to everybody. And I just want to say what an honor it is for me to be here with all of you. And I thank you so much for your attendance and your interest in my father's story. I'm very gratified to see so many familiar faces from our 1619 group and so many new ones as well. So thank you very much. And I'm especially grateful to Donna Berman for extending such a gracious invitation to me and for all of her kindness. So thank you very much, Donna. And I'd also like to thank Jacques Lamar for all of his support. So let me share my screen. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. And everybody can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be speaking about an Afro-Caribbean in the Nazi era. And the Afro-Caribbean was the gentleman in this picture. His name was Lionel Romney, and he was my father. But more specifically, I'm going to be speaking about oral history, and then I'll show you where and when my father lived, after which I will outline his World War II experience as he told it to me. And that will be followed by some brief background on the Nazi era and Mauthausen, which is the concentration camp where my father was imprisoned. And then in his own words, you will hear and see my father speaking about his experience at Mauthausen. And after that, I'll take you inside Mauthausen where I visited, and I will briefly explain my father's survival and then comment on his trauma and healing. And I will conclude with a word about why I wrote my book about my father's wartime experience. So now, because it was oral history that provided me access to my father's story, I'd like to spend a bit of time discussing it, starting with the definition of oral history as the intersection of a person's lived experience with historical events and recorded interviews of the person talking about that intersection. So as such, oral history really creates a bridge between individual human experience and historical events. Oral history democratizes history by reminding us that it is experienced by everyone, not only famous people. Oral history puts a human face on history and personalizes it by describing it from the perspective of an eyewitness. So oral history is really a kind of personal narrative. Now here I just want to digress for a moment and say that possibly the most famous example of personal narrative was written by this young lady who was one of the most iconic figures in World War II history. Of course, this is Anne Frank, who wrote her diary. So you would say, but this is not oral history. And I would say, well, that's true. But it is personal narrative, and it is testimony to the power of personal narrative. The Diary of Anne Frank personalizes the historical context in which it was written. It brings history to life. And that's what oral history does. It brings history to life, and it brings life to history. And that was what my father's oral history did for me. It also led me to learn much more about the Nazi era than I would have if my father had not built that bridge for me. So again, this was my father's name, Lionel Romney. This is when he lived, and this is his life in geographical terms. Now, rather than explain it all, I'll just say that number 1 is meant to represent the Dutch side of the island of St. Martin in the Caribbean. And that is where my father was from. And number 2 is meant to represent the islands of Aruba and Curacao and the country of Venezuela, which are 3 more places where my father lived in his pre-war life. So now I'm going to outline my father's World War II experience as he told it to me in his oral history. So, as a civilian, he was a sailor on cargo ships sailing between the Caribbean, North America, and Europe from the mid-1930s until 1940. And in June 1940, he was aboard the SS Makis, which was a Greek merchant ship sailing through the Mediterranean from Wales on its way to Greece. So when that ship reached the area between Tunisia and Sicily, it struck a floating mine. As you know, a mine is an explosive device. And when it struck the mine, it sank. But the crew was rescued by a ship from the Italian Navy. So again, when my father's ship reached the area between Tunisia over here and Sicily, it must have been somewhere in these waters when it struck the mine and sank. So when the Italian Navy ship rescued the crew, that was how my father became a political prisoner in Italy. So for the next 4 years, he was transferred through a series of internment camps in Italy until 1944, when he was deported from this area of Italy to the Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria, which is right about there. And he remained a prisoner there until that camp was liberated by the US Army at the end of the war. So now, being taken to Mauthausen put him squarely in the hands of the Nazis. So I would just like to say a few words about the Nazi era and Mauthausen. Now, as you know, the Nazi era was particularly notorious for genocide. But do you think that the Holocaust was the first genocide of the 20th century? Well, interestingly enough, the first one was also perpetrated by the Germans. It took place in 1904 in what is now Namibia in southern Africa. And the victims were the indigenous Herero ethnic group, about 80,000 of whom were killed in that genocide. I point this out because the Germans already had a track record of genocide by the time they got to the Nazi era. But in the Nazi era, of course, for the first time in history, homicide and genocide were industrialized. As you know, this was carried out in the concentration camps where 6 million innocent Jewish civilians were killed, and 5 million others were also included in the genocide of the camps. Now, among them were those belonging to these other specifically targeted populations. And I only point this out because Mauthausen had prisoners representing all of these populations. Plus, practically all of the countries of Europe were represented among the prisoners, plus every continent as well. So the prisoner population at Mauthausen was very, very diverse. Now, who would you say is missing from this list of specifically targeted groups? In other words, who else would you expect to see on this list? Now, I can hear you thinking that you would expect to see Black people on this list, but I would say, well, yes and no. Because when you consider that the Nazis were white supremacists on steroids, it is ironic to find that they did not specifically target Black people. That does not mean that Black people were not included in the abuse, murder, and imprisonment of the concentration camp system, because thousands of them were. My father was obviously one of them. But the Nazis just didn't put any resources into targeting them. And I can address the reasons for that in the Q&A if anybody would like to ask. But right now, I just want to say a word about Mauthausen within the context of the concentration camp system. Now, as you know, there were different kinds of concentration camps. There were death camps, which were also known as extermination camps. There were labor camps. There were prison camps. There were women's camps. There were transit camps. But Mauthausen was unique. It was the only camp in the entire concentration camp system that was specifically designated to work its prisoners to death. It was the only death through work camp. About 200,000 people were imprisoned there over the life of the camp. About 90,000 of whom were tortured to death, worked to death, starved to death, and died in other ways, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I specifically want you to remember that they were worked to death and starved to death. Now, The Nazis built a concentration camp at Mauthausen because of the quarry. They built the camp on top of the largest granite quarry in Austria because they needed a captive labor force to quarry the granite and extract the stones. So now, just for some geographical context, Mauthausen is here, and it's near the Czech or Czechoslovakian border, which you will hear my father very briefly mention. And Mauthausen is near the city of Linz, which is on this map because it was the birthplace of Hitler. And this is Auschwitz, which was the largest and most notorious of all the camps. But I show you this map just to illustrate the geographical dimensions of the concentration camp system, which extended from the Netherlands and France in the west, all the way over to Belarus and Ukraine in the east. But there were camps in the countries in between, and even as far up as far north as Latvia, and then all throughout Poland. And Czechoslovakia, and of course, Germany, as you would expect. So when I first saw this map, I was really deeply astonished because my whole life, and I was probably in my 50s, or I know I was in my 50s when I first saw this map. So my whole life until then, I always thought that there were only 4 camps in the entire system because I had never heard of more than 4. I had only heard of Auschwitz, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, and Treblinka. So I didn't know that there were any more than that. So when I saw this map, I was really, really very, very surprised. Until I saw this map, which really shocked me an awful lot more. And this is the same approximate map as the previous screen, but it shows you around 20 times more camps. And I was deeply shocked when I saw this. And I thought, well, this is so many camps that it must be the full extent of the system. There couldn't have been any more camps than this, until I realized that these are only the major camps. There were thousands of camps in the concentration camp system. So it was a system that was monstrous in every way. And again, here's Mauthausen, and here is Auschwitz. My father witnessed the destruction of human life every day that he was at Mauthausen, and he was always wondering if he would be next. The result was that he was deeply traumatized by his experience there, so much so that he was virtually silent about it for over 40 years. But finally, in 1989, he opened up and began to talk about it. I never thought he would because it had taken me over 20 years to get him to talk about it. So I want to play a few short excerpts from his very first conversation about his internment at Mauthausen. And this is from the first oral history interview we ever had together, which took place on this date. And of course, this is a picture of him and me during that conversation.
And so then, after the war, where were you when the war ended?
I was in a camp in Austria.
In Austria, not in Germany.
No, in Germany, in Austria.
In
we
Austria.
came in from Italy. They took us to Austria.
By train.
Yeah, cattle, what the hell you call it?
A cattle car.
Yeah, cattle car.
Yeah.
Arab, what a bundle in there.
And where in Austria?
Where's up in the place is near to Graz. That's in a concentration camp, one of those notorious concentration camps. Mauthausen. It's up on the hill. they had the crematoriums and the camps, you know. The barracks like thing, you know, I had so many people in the barracks. So we were liberated in 1945, the 10th of May.
10th of May.
1945. About a couple of days before Hitler died.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh. Oh, that's
We,
interesting.
we were liberated by the Fifth Army, the American Fifth Army.
A couple of days afterwards?
A couple of days before Hitler died.
Did you ever have any close calls?
Were you ever in, what kind of danger would you say you were in during that time?
Oh, every day was dangerous. There wasn't a day that wasn't, you know, considered. Sometimes you said, so how the hell they gonna get out of here? And then we heard so many, you know, different things from the atrocities that the Germans was committing in the camps. Like before they leave, they kill everybody.
Right.
See if they have to run away. But we were up close to the place in Austria where we were. It was close to the Czechoslovakian border.
Uh-huh.
You can hear the Russian cannonading, and you can hear the concussion from the artillery, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Now, in the next excerpt, you will hear and see him talking about his constant fears and wondering if he would be the next one to die and what it was like to be a captive. He also imitates the SS guards speaking in German. Now, as you know, the SS was an elite military corps that guarded the camps. And the SS was responsible for many of the atrocities committed in the concentration camp system.
The most fearful part was in the night when I came, the SS man would come in the night to call up a number, 7,700, upstate! Get up. You fight like hell because you don't know when you're going to call your number. You take the kid out, you don't see him anymore.
Right.
At that time, the night, the lights is off.
Right.
Hey, drugs! Upstate. Unthreatened. Come on. Then I used to come in every day, twice a day, in the morning and the afternoon, to check to see if anybody had already.
Right. Did a lot of people escape?
No, you couldn't escape. I mean, maybe some people did escape, but they tracked them down. But I mean, the people in the lager, you couldn't escape. Once you got in there, they had the guards in the big, they have electric wire all around the wall, and a guardhouse there, a guardhouse there. And they had some of the prisoners in the lock in the camp, so they come and check to see if everyone was in there. Then you had to line up, and you had to put off, you had to get this man come in, take off, and sitting up.
So he said that he constantly feared hearing his number being called by the SS. He said that he was afraid of that. So that means that he was always listening for a certain number. So this is the number that my father was listening for. This was his prisoner number. And this is what the triangle on his uniform must have looked like. And it's red because he was a political prisoner. And of course, NL is the abbreviation for his country of citizenship, which was the Netherlands. he remembered he remembered the color of his triangle, and he remembered the beginning of his number all those years later. And you can see this number repeated here and here and here, because these are his official concentration camp records. And here you see the number 9, which is the barrack that he was assigned to. And this is how I knew to look for barrack number 9 when I visited Mauthausen. And this is another record of his imprisonment. This is an index card, and what makes this one valuable to me is that it has the date of his arrival at Mauthausen. And again, you see his number here and a lot of the same other information. I visited Mauthausen for the first time in 2006, and of course it's now a museum. So I want to take you inside and just briefly show you a map of what it looked like when it was in use. And the quarry, I want to show you a memorial monument and the stairway of death. So this is what the camp looked like when it was in operation. And the red buildings are the only ones that are still standing today. Now, you heard my father talk about the barracks. So these were the prisoner barracks. And this is barrack number 9, which was my father's assigned barrack. I was able to locate it because all of them are marked where they once stood. So when I found it, I walked from there to there. I wanted to walk in that space because even though it was an emotionally very impactful thing for me to do, I wanted to do it because it gave me a chance to possibly walk in my father's footsteps. And out here, these were the SS barracks. And this whole area out here is now a memorial monument park. Now, if you walk along this footpath, you will come to this stairway, which is called the Stairway of Death, and it leads down onto the floor of the quarry, which is about 1/4 of a mile long and about 1/4 of a mile wide. And it's about 160 feet below the level of the camp. If you remember, I said that the camp sat on top of the quarry, and this is what I meant. So you have to think of the quarry as a big hole with a flat bottom, a big hole that's about 160 feet deep. Now, this is a ledge, which is very, very important. It separates the floor of the quarry from the level where the camp is. And I mentioned the Memorial Monument Park, which is here, and practically every country in Europe has a monument to its citizens that perished in the camp. But there's another country that also has a monument, a memorial monument, and that is the state of Israel. And its monument is out here. It's basically, you could say it's really on the ledge. Instead of being in here with all the others, they put theirs out here on the ledge. And this is what that monument looks like. So this is the Israeli monument to all the Jewish people who perished at Mauthausen. And this sign says Stairway of Death. So if you walk along this footpath in this direction, you will come to the stairway. And nowadays, this is what it looks like when you stand at the top and you look down. And from the same approximate vantage point, you can see most of the quarry. But please, please try to imagine both of these pictures without all of this vegetation, because none of it was there when the camp was in use. So this is the ledge that I was talking about. And this is the 160 feet from the ledge to the floor of the quarry. And you see some trees here. These are some trees. And immediately to the left of the trees, you see this structure, and that is this monument. So this monument is here. This is what it looks like from this vantage point. So I wonder why you would suppose the Israelis put their monument out here on the ledge. And I think that it was because one of the most common ways of torturing, intimidating, and killing prisoners, especially Jewish prisoners, was to throw them over the ledge. So the SS actually used to throw prisoners over this ledge. So the quarry was an instrument of death in several ways, and this was one of them. Now, when you descend the stairway of death and you look up from the bottom, this is what it looks like nowadays. But this is what it looked like when it was in use. You have to remember that the prisoners were starving, and it's also important to remember that it was the Nazis' intention to work the prisoners to death in this camp. And this is how they did it. So what you see here are prisoners walking up the stairway, and each one is carrying a 50-kilo or 110-pound block of granite on his back. And many prisoners died on this stairway because their bodies could not tolerate the stress of carrying so much weight, being in such poor physical condition. But even if they didn't die, a lot of them just simply collapsed from exhaustion. And when they did, they fell backwards, and that would cause a whole cascade of prisoners and blocks of granite falling onto each other. So these are two reasons why this is called the stairway of death. And this is how my father remembered it.
They had a big gully. They had a big box on the shoulder. And the guys down there when they stopped the man, they put a big piece of stone and made them walk up from the gully up to the top. Sometimes the SS men is gone. You couldn't walk too close to the SS man. Because once a guy jumped himself in the SS. Because he couldn't, some people were, hey, young, I tell you something, the young Russian guys was fearless. I want to, sometimes you say, so where the hell a kid like this is doing in a camp? I mean, what crime can he have committed? And they didn't care. When the thing was falling, the Germans knew they was going to lose the war, even more vicious.
And this is the condition in which many prisoners had to carry 110 pounds of granite on their backs multiple times a day up the 186 steps on the stairway of death. And it's also the condition in which many of them were found when the camp was liberated. So here you see prisoners in the barracks, and these are the barracks as they look today when you visit the camp as a museum. But how did you survive? This was one of the first questions I asked my father when he talked about his experience. And he never answered this question, but I know that he survived because he was not assigned to work in the quarry. He was assigned to work as a lumberjack. Also, he was just very strong mentally and physically. But I feel that the main reason why he survived was because of his languages. Prisoners with language skills were often allowed to live longer than others because they could be used as interpreters. So my father was able to speak all of these languages. And since there were a lot of prisoners at Mauthausen who spoke all of these European languages, he was able to communicate with a lot of people. As I said, the prisoner population was very diverse. So there were prisoners there who could speak all of these languages. So one of my father's nicknames was the translator. I wrote a book about my father's experience at Mauthausen, and the subtitle of my book is From Papiamentu to German. And that is meant to pay tribute to the role of languages in my father's survival. Even though he did survive, he was deeply traumatized. However, oral history may have played a part in helping him to heal. So I would like to read a passage from my book that addresses the healing power of speaking about trauma. In the absence of words, the survivor perpetually endures past trauma as present experience, but words allow him to relegate the past to its proper place. Words bring him to a safe space. And I think that that's what happened to my father during our oral history interviews. I read in a book by Shoshana Feldman and Dory Laub that the listener to trauma becomes a kind of co-owner of the trauma. But I believe that I came into full co-ownership of my father's trauma only when I first visited Mauthausen. But somehow, in the same way that oral history was healing for my father, my experience at Mauthausen and then writing the book brought peace to me. So again, reading from my book, visiting Mauthausen finally brought me to a place of peace with my father's experience there. I have never seen my father as a World War II hero, but rather as a victor. Although he was a victim of the Nazis, he was also a victor. His victory was in his survival. Knowing this, I can gratefully be at peace. I feel that Maya Angelou also said it in one of her poems where she wrote, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again." In addition to bringing me to a place of peace, I also wrote my book for a few other reasons. Among them are that I wanted to contribute to African diaspora history. And I also wanted my book to be an example of how everyone has participated in or been a witness to historical events. And I wanted my book to serve as an example to others and encourage them to pursue oral histories with their families. My father's experience was an example of an untold story that only came to light because of oral history. It was through family oral history that I was able to reframe my own perceptions of the Nazi era to a broader, deeper, more diverse and inclusive understanding of that period in history. And this is my father immediately after the end of the war, somewhere in the United Kingdom. So in closing, I would just like to say that I hope that my experience with oral history will encourage you and others to embark on oral history projects with your families and members of your communities. So thank you very much.
Wow.
Wow, Mary. That was very, very moving. Thank you so much for sharing your story and your dad's story. And you are a really excellent teacher. And I said this to you before we started, but I now want to say it again. Your dad must have been so proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. I don't know if I'm worthy of all of that, but thank you. Thank you so much. And again, it's an honor for me to present this to this audience. It means a lot to me. Thank you.
Thank you. So you feel like you could answer some questions if people
I
have
would love to. I would absolutely love to answer some questions. Absolutely.
Okay.
To me, that's my favorite part.
Oh, that's great. Okay, great. Does anybody have any questions? And you can, by the way that's set up, your cameras are off, but you can turn them on if you'd like, and
Yeah.
you can unmute, you can do whatever you'd like to do. Deb, you have a question.
Yeah, were most of the Jehovah's Witnesses of European extraction, or were they Afro-American?
Oh, I would say that they were European. I would say so. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. I think the Nazis were very anti-religion because they didn't want, they wanted to be the objects of people's worship. They didn't want people to worship anybody but them. They wanted everybody to worship Hitler. So, you know, because he was going to be the emperor, right? So they didn't want the people being distracted by religions. So they were very, very anti-religion. But I don't know why they specifically chose the Jehovah's Witnesses as one of the targeted groups. I don't know. I never really understood that. It was explained to me once, but I don't remember. But yeah, thank you for that question.
Michael.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Mary. That was inspiring and enjoyable.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you, I think I noticed your father lived from, passed on in 2004. And I think you said you visited the concentration camp in 2006.
Right.
Is there a reason or part of the history between you and your dad that accounts for your visiting after he passed, as opposed to before? Did he have any interest in revisiting that situation?
Oh, no, no, absolutely. I know, I think that would have been the last thing he would have wanted to do. But while I had my father, you know, I only wanted to hear about it from him. You know, I wanted him to be and I really didn't think about other sources of information because I just felt that what I was hearing from him was so rich. I did the oral history with him over a period of years. So what you heard was just, you know, a small part of the tip of the iceberg. But, you know, so while I was listening to him for those years, talking about all of this, I never really thought very much about other sources of information. And I asked him a lot of questions, but he didn't always answer my questions. So I wrote them down. And because I didn't want to forget them, because the more he talked, the more questions I had. And I didn't want to interrupt him, so I would write the questions. And I would ask them, you know, but sometimes he answered them and sometimes he didn't. So when he passed away, I had about, I don't know, 10 pages of handwritten questions that I had accumulated over the years and that I wanted to ask, and I never had a chance to ask. So without my father there to give me the information, I thought, well, the only way I can get more information, the only way I can continue to learn about this is by going there myself. So that's why I did that. But thank you very much for that question. Yeah. I hope I answered it.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Sure.
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, it's before the question, just an extraordinary presentation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that very
Yeah,
much.
really, really moving and just added a whole new dimension to those issues. And having the opportunity to hear someone lived experience is just extraordinary.
Thank you.
A couple of questions, and I'll just say them, and you can answer whatever you want to answer or not. One is what's that, papiamento?
Yes,
I'm
yes.
assuming that's your father's Caribbean language. And then the other is at the time that he decided to share the story, you know, like what was going on that he decided to do that? Because I know that in me doing some genealogy once, and I found the lady was 100 and some years old, about 101, 102, and I went and found her in a nursing home. And it's just extraordinary conversation. But it reached a point in that conversation where she wouldn't talk.
Mhm.
And it had to do with probably, I don't know, the rape of maybe her mother by some white guy or something. I don't know. But something in there like that, where she just stopped talking. So I was just wondering because your dad didn't talk for almost 40 years about this. And so so that's the other thing. Then in between that time of not talking, what was some of the things he dealt with, the stress? Is there anything about your mom in this story?
That's a lot of questions. So let
Yeah.
me see if I can remember. Okay, let me start with Papiamento. Papiamento is a Spanish and Portuguese-based Creole that originated probably in Curacao by the enslaved people who had no common language. So they kind of created a common language based on their languages of origin, their indigenous languages from wherever they came from in Africa, combined with the languages that were imposed on them by the people who enslaved them. So it's a Spanish and Portuguese-based Creole that's spoken in the Dutch Caribbean, but that originated in Curacao, if I'm not mistaken. And then I think the next question is about why he shared why did he share this story when he did? And everybody asks that question, and the answer is that I don't know. I have absolutely no idea why he started talking when he did. For over 20 years, I tried to get him to talk about it because I wasn't supposed to know that anything had happened. Because I knew that he didn't want to talk about it. My mother had told me that, she didn't know much herself because he didn't talk about it. And he made it very clear to her that he didn't want to talk about it. He didn't want any questions. He didn't want anybody to know, etc. But I don't know. I mean, I tried for a long time. So during that oral history interview, I got him to the point where I was able to paint him into a corner. So I said, so where were you when the war ended? Because I knew that he was in a concentration camp, but I heard that it was a German concentration camp and I thought that all the concentration camps were in Germany. I thought that there were 4 concentration camps and that they were all in Germany. That was how limited my knowledge was, or I'll be crass and I'll say that was how ignorant I was. I had no idea. So I wanted to know, but I just didn't know. So I tried to paint him into a corner where he couldn't escape. So that's why I said, so where were you when the war ended? So I think he just felt that there was no way out of it. And he finally had to do it. Now, another possibility is that there was a stranger there with us, not a stranger to me, but a stranger to him. And there was a camera there. And a camera is an impartial observer. The camera won't judge you. It won't, I mean, a camera is not always as intimidating as a person. So, maybe the presence of the camera, maybe the presence of the stranger. I don't know. I'll never know. But I was very interested in what you said about the lady who didn't want to talk. She would only talk up to a certain point. Well, her silence was part of the trauma. Whatever trauma she experienced, or whatever trauma of which she was a co-owner, because as you said, maybe her mother had experienced some trauma that she knew about. So, you know, that trauma emerges in silence. So it was because of her trauma, in my opinion, that she didn't want to speak. Now, that's exactly what happened to my father. It was because of his trauma that he did not want to speak. That's part of the trauma. You know, the silence is part of the trauma. You might have heard me say at one point or another that silence is the voice of trauma. And that was how my father dealt with it for over 40 years. Maybe he was just ready. Maybe, I don't know, maybe he started talking when he did because he was just ready. Maybe I had nothing to do with it. Maybe even if I hadn't pushed him, he wouldn't have done it. I mean, he would have done it, maybe, but it's impossible to know. I have no idea. But I think that if that lady that you spoke to had shared whatever she was silent about, it might have helped her, because you know, as you saw in one of those quotes I read from the book, speaking about trauma is often part of the healing. So yeah, I did I answer your questions?
Yeah, anything about your mom?
Oh yeah, my mother. Well, my father didn't talk. He told her, I think they might have had one conversation about his experience, because she knew almost nothing. I mean, this is a kind of a long story, but here's what happened. You know how children always want to know about their parents' lives before the children, were born. So, you know, my mother was very forthcoming. You know, I didn't have to ask her, she would just talk. But my father was not as forthcoming. So he would talk about his childhood in St. Martin, and then he would talk about coming to New York in the late 40s and what that was like. And as I got older, I realized that there was a gap, and that the gap was World War II. So I started asking him about it, but he wouldn't talk. So after years of asking him, I said to my mother, I said, I want to know about Dad's experience in the war. Why won't he tell me? And she said, he was in a concentration camp. And when he said that, I was so, I mean, I still remember the impact of the shock, the impact of the shock of hearing that, because nothing could have prepared me for it. I was extremely shocked. And she said, but he doesn't want to talk about it. He suffered greatly, and he doesn't want to talk about that suffering. So you must never ask him, and you must never let him know that you know. So that was why it took me so long. I had to dance around it. I had to, you know, maneuver around asking him about it, you know. So once every 1 or 2 years, I would try, but I couldn't ask him directly, and I couldn't let him know that I knew. So you know, she knew she knew almost nothing. She didn't know she didn't know exactly what he was being silent about. So, yeah.
Mary, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Following up on that, did you see a difference in your dad's behavior once he started talking? Because you mentioned that you felt that it was healing. How did the healing manifest itself?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And thank you, Michael, for your question. Robert, thank you, Robert, for your questions. I appreciate those very much.
Call me by my twin.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Donna, I feel that, well, okay, after he started talking, he never stopped. That's why I was able to carry on the oral history for so many years. I think we talked about it for the next a little more than 10 years. So I feel that, you know, he needed to talk about it. that's why he never stopped talking about it. That's why I feel that it was healing for him, because he never did stop talking about it. And I know that he was thinking about it often, because sometimes I would sit down next to him and, you know, we would just be looking out the window. We weren't talking or anything. We would just be sitting there relaxing together. And suddenly he would start in mid-sentence, he would start talking about the experience. He would say something like, well, they did that because they were bad to the last minute. Those Nazis, they were bad to the last minute. Now, the reason why they did that was because they were trying to, you know, whatever he was saying. But I know that he was thinking about it, and he never did stop talking about it. I mean, he didn't talk about it all day, every day. I don't mean that. I just mean that it was not difficult for me to get him to talk about it from then on.
Did you feel like he was at more peace? Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Oh yeah, yeah.
You did a good thing. You did a really good thing.
I mean, I intuitively, I knew that it was good for him, but I didn't know why. I used to think about it a little bit, but I just, you know, intuitively, I just intuited that it was good for him to talk about it. But I didn't know anything about trauma theory or any of that until I started the book, or until I was almost done with the book, actually. But yeah,
there are so many things to learn from what you said tonight in terms of, you know, politically, personally, psychologically, emotionally. There's a really, you gave us so much. You gave us so much tonight. Deb, you had a question.
Wasn't a question so much as an appreciation of the experience, because it actually, trauma lives in your body, and you managed to convey it. My stomach was rolling around, and I felt like I'd been hit. And I guess he must have felt that way too. I mean, if he had seen some of those prisoners, I'm sure he incorporated it in his body.
absolutely.
And that's because that's how what you talked about affected.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I had an almost similar experience the first time I visited the camp. I couldn't get myself to walk in there. I was petrified and paralyzed with fear. The first time we visited that camp, I could not, for about 5 hours, I could not get myself to walk into that place. I found every excuse in the book to stay outside, because it's a huge place, and it has that big memorial monument park. You know, you can walk around there for hours. That's very, very interesting. And then it has the quarry. You can go up and down the stairway of death. You can walk around in the quarry. We did that. It had a big bookstore. You know, we went in there and bought a lot of books. It had a visitor's center on the outside, which was a huge, beautiful, beautiful exhibition area. We spent hours in there, and I found every excuse not to go in there. And I was petrified with fear. I thought that if I went in there, I would be devoured and I would die. I was shaking. I've never felt that kind of terror in my entire life. I was just horrified by the notion of going in there. I mean, you know, every day for more than a year before that moment, I was thrilled at the prospect of visiting the camp. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to walk in my father's footsteps. I couldn't wait to get there. And then when we got there on that very first day, I could not bring myself to walk in there. I've never been as scared of anything in my entire life as I was walking through that main gate. And as soon as I had to go in because my husband I didn't tell him what was going on. So he was getting impatient, very impatient. So, I had to bring myself to go in. I had to do it. I mean, what else could I used every excuse, so there were no more excuses. So I finally had to go in. And when I did, I felt the greatest sense of relief I've ever felt. I mean, I didn't expect to feel that, but I did. And so, I mean, that was kind of, I think, my way of I think that was part of the co-ownership of his trauma.
Of the trauma.
Yeah.
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 Thank you.
It lives in you.
Yes, it does. And I think that was how it was living in me. It was totally subconscious. And I didn't even know at that point, I didn't know why I was so scared to walk inside of that place. I didn't know. I knew, I mean, intellectually, I must have known that nothing would happen to me, but I wasn't thinking intellectually, I was thinking emotionally. And I was only feeling, I wasn't thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably
That makes
absorbing.
complete sense. It makes complete sense. I remember visiting Auschwitz when I was in Poland, and I had no personal connection to that place. And it was still overwhelming. And it was dissonant to see, and you could see it in some of your photos from 2006 or that period, how park-like, how innocent seeming, and then to know your father's history, it must have been overwhelming. It must have taken so much strength to do that. And I completely understand and grateful to you for sharing that, because as Deb was saying, when I saw some of those images of those bodies, I felt a kind of dizziness. I felt, wow, I'm not prepared, not prepared for that. And yet you presented it so beautifully and gently and clearly, that I could get through that. But yeah, very moving. So much appreciate what you've shared and what you did for your father. So lovely, so loving.
When you go to a place like that, where so much horror has happened, the energy lives there. And you have such a big, beautiful, open heart. I think that probably what you were feeling, in addition to your father's pain, was the pain that lives in that place. And they can make it as antiseptic as they want. And they can have as many bookstores and gift shops and whatever they want, but that pain lives there.
Oh, absolutely. The pain absolutely lives there.
Yes. It's a very courageous thing you did.
I didn't feel that I was being courageous or anything, when I was doing it. I just wanted to learn more. I just thought, well, this is the only other source. This is the best source of information, going to the place itself. And I want to learn more. So I didn't think that it would take any particular effort, I have to say. So I was really surprised when I felt that way. Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions?
I have one more after anyone else who wants to go.
Let me check for any mechanical hands. I don't see any. Robert, please.
Yeah, Mary, I'm just listening to your experience and what you understand about trauma now and what it took for you to even go into that place. As horrendous as it is, what would you say, if anything, it's, you know, you doing the work that you've done, the contribution to your life that you know, shape, you know, kind of like your spirit or your way of being, or kind of like having something that can never be taken away from you or affected in a certain way? Anything like that?
Do you mean how was it a life-changing experience for me?
Yeah, that's one way to put it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in so many ways, but I guess it helped me to understand my father a lot better.
Hmm.
Oh, I mean, the whole oral history, not only visiting the camp, but doing that oral history with him really helped me. It brought us a lot closer together. It changed our relationship enormously. It brought me much closer to my father. I understood him much better.
Hmm.
And we did the oral history not only about his World War II experiences, but about the family history and about the history of St. Martin and other things, you know. So I learned so much more from him by doing that oral history. And I think, you know, really the reason why I wrote that book is, one of the main reasons is because I really want other people whose stories are left out of the history books. I really want them to embark on oral histories with their families and members of their communities, because I feel that oral history, as I said, it democratizes history in ways that let's say traditionally presented history does not. So I think that I developed an understanding of the need for and significance of oral history for all oppressed peoples. Really, it's very, very important. I mean, there's one of the greatest treasures of, or I'll say among the greatest treasures of Holocaust history are the survivor testimonies. That they're extremely valuable. And like I said, you know, something like the Diary of Anne Frank, because it personalizes the history. So I think, you know, doing this with my father really awakened that awareness in me. I came to understand the importance of oral history, and I encourage really everybody, not only other people whose history has been erased or whose history has not been allowed to emerge. I encourage everybody to embark on oral histories with their elders. It's so important. It's so, it's full of self-discovery. I mean, when you do an oral history with someone in your family, it really, it helps you to learn a lot about yourself in addition to the person whose oral history you're recording and the rest of your family. So I think that what I learned about not only my father and the history, but about the need for oral history itself, I think has been very important for me, especially in my work. So I don't know, does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, yeah.
I thought of one more question because of what you were just saying. Do you think your father experienced some of that bearing witness to a history that was beyond, that certainly was very personal, but also gave him a role? I'm thinking of the camera. I thought it was so interesting when you mentioned how the camera might have opened him up. Like, was that a place for him to feel some agency as someone bearing witness? Do you think that was part of it for him?
I think, I don't think that he thought about that consciously. I don't think so. I think that it did give him the agency that he was missing by not talking about it, right? but I don't think he thought about that. I don't think he was thinking about that. I mean, he was still in trauma as he was speaking.
Yes.
Part of the trauma involves what he did in terms of imitating the SS. That's what people in trauma do. They go back. They go back to where they were when the trauma occurred, and they relive it. So his way of doing that, I mean, one of his ways of doing that was to imitate the SS and other people. I mean, it wasn't only the SS that he imitated, it was some of the other prisoners. And because, you know, he talked about other prisoners, and he talked about them in the languages that they were speaking. So if they were speaking to him in Spanish, then he would do it in Spanish. If it was Italian, then, you know, even Russian, he doesn't even speak Russian, but he didn't speak Russian, but he imitated some of the Russian prisoners cursing at the SS, because he said the Russians were fearless. So they didn't mind walking up to the SS and start cursing them. They, you know, and he remembered that very vividly. And that is something that you see among other survivors of the Holocaust, that they never forget the sound of the SS barking those orders. They don't forget that. That's something that a lot of Holocaust survivors will imitate. I think I remember reading that in Primo Levi and a few others, but yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, did I answer your question? Or?
Oh, yes, yes.
Mary, if someone wants to buy your book, how could they do it?
Oh, it's on Amazon. I think that's the only, yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
You have been just so open and gracious, and there's just such an elegance about you and about the way you presented tonight. I think we all are just so blown away by the story and by you. I can't thank you enough. I just feel like I want to applaud you, really. Thank you so much for this.
Well,
And
thank you.
yeah, and thank you. And I want to mention, by the way, that Daniel Nishan is with us tonight, and at Charter Oak, he's our operations director. And it's so nice to have you here tonight, Daniel.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, great. I see that Barbara wrote, I joined Donna in her plus. Yeah, you just did great. And I want to thank everybody for coming. And it's so lovely to be with you. And I hope that you'll come back because we have a bunch of different talks on Zoom in September, as I said in the beginning. And I hope you'll come back. It's really wonderful to be with you. Lillian, did you want to say something?
Just thank you. And it was so moving. And I think about my relationship with my father and how she must have felt as she was receiving all of this information. It was excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's very kind. I want to thank everybody who asked all these brilliant questions. Thank you, Robert and Anne and Donna, everybody who asked questions and made comments. Thank you very much. And thank you, all of you, for your attendance and for your interest. I really appreciate it very deeply. It's an honor to be able to speak to this group. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mary, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Have a really good night. And join us in the 1619 project. We'd love to have you.
I will.
We'll see you in 2 weeks. See you in 2 weeks. I got a bonus. Got a bonus round this week.
That's right. Yeah, bonus round. That's right. That's right. Exactly. Thank you, everyone. Blessing. Thank you.
Thank you
Take
so
good care.
much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you.